Rainy night shift alone at work, horror stories. Story number 1, The Night Watchman's Ordeal. The rain pounded relentlessly against the roof of the abandoned Millbrook factory as I began my night shift as a security guard. The old building creaked and groaned under the assault of the storm, its empty halls echoing with each roll of thunder. I'd been working here for 6 months, and while the job was usually uneventful, tonight felt different. As I settled into the small security office, I couldn't shake an overwhelming sense of dread. The bank of monitors before me showed grainy, black and white feeds from various parts of the factory. For the first few hours, all was quiet save for the constant drumming of rain. Around midnight, I started my first round. Flashlight in hand, I walked through the cavernous main floor, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. As I reached the far end of the building, a sudden crash made me jump. It had come from the old loading dock. Cautiously, I approached the area. One of the large metal doors had fallen off its rusted hinges, likely due to the wind and rain. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw a set of wet footprints leading away from the fallen door. They weren't mine. My heart raced as I followed the trail deeper into the factory. The footprints led to the old office section, ending at a door marked Manager's Office. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible beyond. With trembling hands, I pushed it open. The office was a mess, papers strewn about, filing cabinets overturned. And there, hunched in the corner, was a figure. As my light fell upon it, it slowly turned to face me. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its face was gaunt, eyes sunken and glowing faintly in the darkness. Its skin was a pale, sickly green, and where its mouth should have been, there was only a mass of writhing tentacles. I stumbled backward, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The creature let out a horrible, gurgling shriek and lunged towards me. I ran, blind with terror, through the dark hallways of the factory. Behind me, I could hear the wet slap of the thing's footsteps, always just a few paces behind. Somehow, I made it back to the security office. I slammed the door shut and barricaded it with a desk. For hours, I huddled there, listening to the creature scratch and pound at the door, its inhuman wails mixing with the sound of the storm outside. When morning finally came, and with it my relief, there was no sign of the creature. The door to the manager's office was closed, the mess inside gone. Even the fallen loading dock door was back in place, showing no signs of damage. I quit that very day. To this day, I don't know what I encountered in that factory. Was it a hallucination brought on by the isolation and the storm? Or was it something more sinister, a remnant of the factory's past that only emerges on the darkest, rainiest nights? All I know is that I'll never work another night shift again, especially not when it's raining. Story number 2, The Graveyard Shift at Mercy Hospital. The rain was coming down in sheets as I arrived at Mercy Hospital for my graveyard shift in the radiology department. The old building loomed before me, its windows dark save for a few scattered lights. As I made my way to the basement where the department was located, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. For the first few hours, everything was normal. I ran scans for the ER, processed images, and tried to ignore the constant patter of rain against the small, high windows. But around 3 a.m., things took a strange turn. The lights in the hallway began to flicker, and I heard a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere down the corridor. It sounded almost like a heartbeat. Curious and unnerved, I stepped out to investigate. As I approached the old storage room at the end of the hall, the thumping grew louder. Just as I reached for the door handle, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the basement. I jumped back, my heart racing. Turning to run, I saw something that made me freeze in place. At the other end of the hallway stood a figure in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform. Her face was hidden in shadow, but I could see that her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering ever so slightly above the floor. I blinked and she was gone. The lights stopped flickering and an eerie silence fell over the basement. Shaken, I retreated to the control room, where I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, my relief was waking me up. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed something odd on one of the screens. It was an X-ray I didn't remember taking, showing a human rib cage with an empty black void where the heart should have been. I never mentioned what happened that night to anyone, but every time I work the graveyard shift now, especially when it's raining, I can't help but feel like something is watching me from the shadows. And sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, I swear I can hear that rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat echoing through the halls of Mercy Hospital. Story number 3, The Midnight Librarian. The rain drummed steadily against the windows of the Blackwood Public Library as I began my night shift. As the new midnight librarian, my job was to reshelve books, organize the stacks, and prepare for the next day's activities. Usually I found the quiet atmosphere soothing, but tonight something felt different. Around midnight, as I was deep in the stacks, I heard a soft whisper. At first I dismissed it, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. It sounded like a name, Emily. I looked around, but saw no one. Unnerved, I decided to do a quick sweep of the building. As I returned to the main floor, I noticed a book lying open on one of the reading tables. It was an old volume on local history that I had reshelved earlier. The book was open to a page about a tragic fire that had occurred in the library in 1920, claiming several lives, including that of a young librarian named Emily Blackwood. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the whispered name. As I reached out to close the book, all the lights in the library suddenly went out. In the darkness, I heard the whisper again, closer this time, as if spoken directly into my ear. Fumbling for my phone, I turned on its light. And there she was, a young woman in early 20th century dress, her form translucent and flickering. Her eyes met mine, filled with a profound sadness. "Help me," she mouthed, reaching out a spectral hand. Before I could react, a gust of wind tore through the library, extinguishing my phone's light and sending papers flying. When the lights came back on, she was gone, but I could still feel her presence. I spent the rest of my shift huddled in the librarian's office, jumping at every sound. When morning came, I handed in my resignation. I couldn't spend another night in that library, alone with the ghosts of the past. To this day, I avoid libraries after dark, and whenever I hear rain against a window, I can't help but listen for that whispered name, carried on the wind like a forgotten memory. The experience has left me with a deep curiosity about the library's history and the tragic fire. Part of me wonders if I should have stayed, if there was something I could have done to help Emily find peace. But the other part of me is grateful to have escaped with my sanity intact. Sometimes, on particularly stormy nights, I find myself drawn to the library, staring up at its dark windows from across the street. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see a pale face looking back at me, silently pleading for help that I'm too afraid to give.